I speak in the name of our loving, liberating, and life-giving God. Amen. Up until the early 20th century, the front room of an American home was generally called a parlor, as it is in most other former British colonies. This space was used to welcome guests, entertain visitors, and catch up, the name of the room actually coming from the French verb to speak, parler. But in addition to these ordinary uses, the parlor had another important function. It was the room in the house where, after a member of the family died, his or her body would be laid out prior to burial. Before the rise of modern medicine, people were born in their homes, they lived in their homes, and they died in their homes. And when they did, they stayed in their homes until their immortal souls were commended back to God and their earthly remains committed to the ground. But around the end of World War I, the name of this room changed for two related reasons. First, with so many bodies coming back from the war, many embalmed in anticipation of the long journey home, a traditional laying out or wake wasn't really an option. Families needed help receiving and caring for the remains of their dearly departed. And slowly, funeral parlors, previously unheard of, began to spring up to meet this need. Then, in 1918, exactly 100 years ago, a vicious strain of Spanish influenza swept the globe. The pandemic was so widespread that an estimated 500 million people, a full third of the world's population at the time, got sick, and 50 million died. Between 1917 and 1918 alone, average life expectancy in the US dropped 12 years. As people continued to lay their recently departed family members in the parlor over and over and over again, many started to refer to it as the death room instead. It fit, and it stuck. As conditions improved in the following years, and soldiers continued to return home to start a family more often than to be laid to rest, the Ladies' Home Journal started printing blueprints for the homes of those families, and editor Edward Bach suggested that the time had come to let go of the death room. And this is how most of us came to have a living room in our homes. Bach's fitting, more upbeat, alternative nomenclature. After all, as increasingly modern hospitals took root in the culture, fewer people died at home. And regardless of where they died, those funeral parlors, which stuck around, offered a convenient place for a wake. The home, it seemed, was now reserved for living, parlor and all. And there are some great things about that, but in effect, and aptly reflected in our language, this is how we outsourced death and dying, setting it safely beyond the boundaries of our most intimate spaces, our most intimate thoughts, as far away as possible. With the rise of skilled nursing units and assisted living, preventative care, supplements, the fitness industry, vaccines, and fresh, organic, local, whole, raw foods, we've managed to push this natural process ever further outward, the boundary of illness and decline receding further back, at least for a time. For people so remarkably committed to objective truth and scientific proof, we remain remarkably committed to the illusion that we will not die. That is, until this illusion comes crashing down on us, until someone we love is lost, remission slips into relapse, the tests come back irregular, the phone rings in the night or on a sunny afternoon. We can change our place on the board and invent new rules for the game, but certain things, card or dice, and the number of players, where we begin and where we end, They are simply beyond our reach, and end we do, and end we will. This is the sobering truth that confronts us on the cusp of the observance of All Hallowtide, a lesser-known triduum of the Church, marked by All Saints' Eve, Halloween, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day, which we anticipate together this morning. While All Saints has remained a primary feast in most churches around the world, All Souls was all but lost to obscurity in many Protestant traditions. The need for remembering, praying for and to and with those ordinary souls we've each loved and lost, seeming less urgent in a cosmos purged of purgatory. But in truth, where All Souls has declined, All Saints, originally intended to celebrate the heroes of our faith, has expanded to meet this deep human need to draw near and commune with those whom we have loved and lost, who remain so much a part of us, though we see them no longer. Last weekend, at our annual diocesan convention, lay and ordained delegates were invited to reflect on a favorite saint at different reflective moments throughout our 2 days together. I was struck by how many of those stories celebrated not a hero or a martyr, but a grandmother, a mentor, someone who reached out in love at one point or another and helped the speaker become more fully themselves. One man, raised in a Hispanic and deeply Catholic home, spoke about his finally coming out in college, consumed with fear and shame and a tremendous sense that he would lose everything if he ever acknowledged this truth. As his grades declined and his spirit sagged, he was called into the office of his advisor one day, a nun, naturally, who pressed him hard, encouraging him to open up. Finally, bereft, desperate, he said, "Sister, I think I'm gay." She stood up, and his heart dropped, countless memories of rulers across the knuckles running through his mind as she walked over to him, and then, much to his surprise, took his round, soft cheeks in her hands and said, "Do you know how loved you are?" Another person spoke of his grandmother, a deeply faithful descendant of slaves and lifelong Episcopalian, who watched in fear as her grandson joined a Philadelphia gang and dipped his toe into theft and petty crime. She prayed for him every day, prayed God would make a way for him where none was yet clear. And he believes it was through her prayers and her love that he stumbled into a Boy Scout troop that turned him around, opened doors, and saved his life. Another, a priest, qualified his words by acknowledging that this person didn't fit the traditional definition of a saint, but that he would speak of Matthew Shepard nonetheless, and went on to reflect on how the recent announcement that Matthew's remains would be interred in our national cathedral had deeply moved him, stirred him, inspired him. This happened on Friday, in case you missed it, and it was a powerful moment indeed. A nun, a grandmother, a teenager. These are among the dearly departed we remember today, whom we hold in light and love, reach out to in hope and heartache. Add to that list a mother, a father, a daughter, a husband, a wife, a son, a best friend, a fellow soldier, a longtime parishioner. Add to that list another ordinary, grace-drenched, complicated life, a life of glorious days and disappointments, marvelousness and mistakes, so human, so holy, not because we are so good, but because God is so good. And God managed, through those great and sometimes grisly details, to shine. Jesus tells us in a gospel passage we often hear at funerals that in God's house there are many mansions, there are many rooms, room enough for the living, room enough for the dying. room enough for the growing and the declining, for the faithful and the fearful, room enough for us, room enough for all. Today, and as we observe these feasts in the week ahead, we are invited to linger in God's parlor, that in-between place where visitors are welcomed and guests become friends, where old ties are rekindled and hearts are broken open. It doesn't make sense that such a place, such a time exists, but we don't have to understand it to enjoy it any more than we understand God's blessing and God's mercy when we receive and relish them. Just come share at the feast with those whose earthly pilgrimage has come to an end. Come enjoy the conversation, the connection, the communion that awaits. Come discover that the closer we come to God, the closer we come to one another in this world and the next. That our endings are new beginnings. Come with your grief and your gratitude, your hope and your heartbreak. There's room at the table, and God, the author of our salvation, has so much more to say. Amen.